Let's look at the Hyperscale Manager done by Moshe Weiss and his talented team in Tel Aviv, Israel. First, let's log in as an administrator. You can see the login button, or just below it, you can actually see the cloud integration link, so you can actually take a look at our documentation, our APIs, as well as automating your VMware environment. Also, you can actually take a look at our community. You can actually use your QR device on your phone or directly on the screen right here, connect to our social community so you can update the product with your comments and feedback. As we log in right now, you'll actually see the dashboard. Take a look. On our upper left, we actually have the systems that are defined. Notice I have 4 systems that are defined right here. I have 2 Flash A9000s. I have 1 XIV. And I have 1 Spectrum Accelerate. And notice the cloud icon. That means that it's off-premise. Remember, this is our XIV as software or software-defined storage. Take a look at each one of the columns. You can actually see the physical usage displayed below them. This is also the next part of the column, which is the written versus allocated. This is very useful for compressed or dedupe systems, for example, the Flash or the XIV. The Spectrum Accelerate doesn't have that, so that's why it only has written. I have IOPS and I have latencies that I show underneath each of the columns, so you can actually see how they're individually done in terms of IOPS for a particular set of machines. The graph underneath is hot. So in other words, if I have 2 systems, I can actually go to those particular systems and actually individually take a look at those values. I can also take a look at latencies, again broken out by those particular columns. I can take a look at each particular group, or I can actually drill down even further into the chart. Take a look, I can see the max, minimum, and averages. You'll see that this hot charting is available in many of the other screens. Now let's take a look at deduplication across all of my defined systems, and also my compression across all of my defined systems, as well as totals. I can also bring up the mirrored volumes, the mapped volumes, and the quality of service. So I can actually hot link to those particular screens if I want to, or actually take a look at individuals. Also take a look at my health hub. This is everything that would affect my environment, and I can actually see best practices in terms of things that I might want to fix or change. For example, the capacity is near 89% full in one particular pool, so I obviously want to take a look at that pool or change the threshold. Or this host, take a look at its mapping because it's obviously not mapped anywhere. And I have 81 terabytes that need to be reclaimed. They're not being used. They're allocated, but they're not mapped or something else that I can drill into. For example, there's that mapping. Here's the capacity. Here's those snapshots or mirroring across my entire environment. And of course, you can change those thresholds and the configuration of the health tips right here with the gear icon. Next, let's drill into the actual A9000. You'll actually see that I actually have 2 of them defined. Notice my health is updated, so is my written and allocated, because I'm just focusing on these 2 systems. And again, this is how much was written by the host versus how much dedupe and effective capacity I expect to see. This is how much I can reclaim based on volumes that aren't being used. I can actually click here to go right to those particular volumes, and notice the difference here. I can see that what I've actually written to the array is 5.3. The charts down below, same as earlier, they're hot. I can actually bring up the max, minimum, average. I can see my current reduction rate. I can actually go out by dedupe or compression. And again, my health, much different than earlier because these particular systems are doing much better. I can actually go to any other particular system I want by the drop down. Notice I can go to all my flashes, the XIV, or if I scroll down, I can go to individual systems. For example, now that I've gone to my Spectrum Accelerate, you can see that my display on my dashboard has changed. You can see the off-premise cloud icon. You can see the graphic. You can see how much has actually been written. I don't have to worry about reclaimable capacity. I can see my latency. I can see my IOPS. Going back to all of my systems, take a look. My dashboard again is updated, so it actually shows the health of all of my systems combined. If I go just into the XIV, I can see that I have one defined. Notice the graphic has changed. I can see its address and serial number. I can see its compression. Remember, it doesn't have deduplication at this time, so that's why we have just the compression listed. Back to my dashboard, you can actually see that I have an alert icon, so I can actually go to the individual alerts. You saw this before with the Health Hub, but here's another way of getting access to that particular series of information. If I want to make anything new, a new volume, a host, a cluster, a pool, a domain, a user group, or system, this is how I do it. If I want to change the interface, I can do that from light to dark or back again. If I actually want to change some of the management server settings or the cloud integration piece, I can do that there. If I want to grab more help, more videos, as well as tips or download the XCLI, I can do that right here with the Lifesaver or help icon. Notice I actually have a user icon where I can change my user. We already know about the dashboard. The system and domain view, this is how I can go into individual domains, system, events, alerts, hardware view, as well as the system capacity. I can go into statistics, volume, host, quality of service. Not only that, forecasting. Take a look. I have 3 separate forecasting reports. Under pools and volumes, my snapshots, consistency groups, or even snapshot groups are available for me to manage or monitor. Under volumes, I can do host and clusters, quality of service. I can do remote views. For example, the mobility, migration, the connectivity. I can actually change my user groups or my users. If I need to manage the management server itself or add more systems or change the security, I can do that right there. As before, I can actually go to the actual community or go directly from my phone. I can also do multiple tabs. Right now we have the dashboard tab, but if I want to have other tabs, simply by adding more tabs, I can then either use the search bar up there, or if I actually use the button bar, where I can actually click on some of those buttons and do different views. You'll see that in a second here. As you can see, I can use my mouse or keyboard, so I can actually start looking for anything that is defined in my environment. As you can see, that could be a volume, a host, a user. If I even start typing some of that, I will have an alphabetical match. For example, volumes. Volumes that contain the word volume. User groups that contain the word VOL, etc. And as you can see, I have some different matches where I can click and immediately have that filter and bring that up. Now that I've clicked on volume, I can actually do a deeper filter. Volume is managed, or the type, or the mapping status. I can also type up here is, just like a normal operand. So for example, the volume is what? Is it mapped? Yes. Is it compressed? Or, for example, maybe it's mapped. Not. In other words, not mapped. In this case, I'll do volume is mapped, yes. And as you can see, I can click on my search icon. So now all my volumes in my entire environment that are mapped, 173 volumes. Not only that, the columns at the top, not only they are resizable, but they're configurable. And so I can actually change those columns as well as save them as future views. You'll see that in a couple seconds. For example, if I click on a particular object, I can navigate directly to that object. I can go to that particular pool object if I want to. You can see how each individual part is pretty hot. Here's how I can add or remove some columns. So for example, under each section, I can actually add or remove some of those other columns. Not only that, I would then save that under Save This Column Set For. So in this case, I can actually add a couple more columns. It will actually then start showing up in my display so I can actually see them. I can sort by them as well. As I scroll on over, I can see the production status and whether they're compressed or not. As I scroll down, you can actually see different volumes. Now, once I've selected a particular volume, you'll see on the right-hand side it gives me more information about it. I have the IOPS down below, as well as on the right-hand side I have the hub for just that one volume. It's mapping, if it's mirrored, if it's part of a quality of service, a consistency group, if it's part of mobility or migration. If I want to change the name, if I want to compress this volume, notice it is not compressed now, but it's offering that I can compress it. And of course, the gauges with the decimal readout, so I can actually see how much is written or stored on that particular volume. If I want to compress it, I can click. You can see that I can either delete the volume after I'm done or keep it. If I scroll down, I can actually see more information about that particular volume, including its worldwide name. Furthermore, I can actually maximize this so I can see more of this particular screen instead of the hub display up above. If I want to change the name, very simply done. Change the name and then click Apply. I'm going to back out of that. By clicking on the mapping, I can see the host or the clusters. As you can see, here's the host. I can navigate to that object. I can show statistics. I can change the LUN ID or even unmap it. I can see if it's part of a quality of service. If so or not, I can add one. Same thing with consistency groups. I can add a consistency group. Either create a new one or use an existing consistency group. I can see how that one volume is across all of the other belonging items, like for example pools or snapshots. If I want to actually change the pool that it's part of or take a snapshot, I can do that right here. For example, if I want to move it to a different pool, I could just simply click on one of the other existing pools and click on Apply. Back to my volume, as you can see, the update changes. See my IOPS, the latency, and the bandwidth down below. Notice the arrows so I can actually bring them up in a more granular view to actually see more data. After a few seconds, you'll see that it actually starts showing a live version of the current IOPS. It's also hot, like you saw earlier, so that I can actually go to different points. I can also go to historic IOPS over the last year. I can bring up reads, writes, hits, or misses. I can bring up bandwidth as well as latencies. Meanwhile, I can also change this. So for example, if I want to change to a different volume, notice how my display immediately updates. I now have 5 volumes selected. Notice the IOPS has changed, and my hub has changed. I now have 5 volumes, and everything about them is stored on the other side for me to manage or monitor. If I scroll down, you can actually see the total written capacity and stored and the total size. If I want to do actions on these, not a problem. I can bring up the snapshots, create more snapshots of these 5. Look how easy this is. I can easily take 5 separate snapshots, change the deletion priority if I want. If I want to change the mapping, view, modify, or unmap all of them at once, I can do that right here. I can bring up the volume capacity and forecasting report. I can bring up the compression. I can bring up the option to even delete it. All of those at once. Be careful. Notice down below my IOPS, latency, and bandwidth for all 5. So this can show me how, in a moment, notice how a series of volumes are looking from an IOPS and performance standpoint. I can go directly to an object anywhere. For example, now I've selected a particular pool. You can actually see my display is updated. I can see that there's no quality of service on this pool. I can see the volumes in the pool. I can actually see the physical usage. I can see that it's a thin pool. This is on an XIV. I can see the written. I can export this as a CSV. So that means I can export this as a nice comma split value. I can see the usage. And not only that, take a look. I can actually bring up that live chart and actually see the space and usage and forecast how it will actually be used in the future based on its current allocations and how much it's been used. Again, it's a live chart, so you can actually click on any of those hot buttons. If I want to change some of those columns so I can actually see some of the forecasting on my column bar, I can do that right here. Now then, if I want to search for something else. Obviously, I've brought up all my pools now, all 28 pools across my entire environment. I can actually see the thresholds for when it's going to alert me or when something actually might theoretically go outside its allocation. In this case, take a look at this one particular XIV notes. This particular pool is very near its allocation. Take a look. We'll take a look at its forecast. So based on how it's been utilized, you can see how very quickly we're able to forecast when it will actually fill up and I'll actually need to get more space in that pool or move some volumes out. If I go to my system view, I can bring up all my systems. I can do the same thing with belonging. So this one pool, it shows me 4 volumes, 1 domain, and it's part of one system. If I click on that, I go to just that one system so I can see this one particular system, or go back to where I was so I can actually see those 4 volumes. Here are those 4 volumes in this one pool. And I can actually change that filter. Again, back to the nice page where I can actually bring up all 188 volumes. Notice how my hub has changed. Notice how it shows all the systems and domains and pools and snapshots those 188 volumes are a part of. Now, since I see that they're all part of these various systems, I can see those 4 systems. Or navigating just to one particular system, I can bring up the particular system and its components, whether or not they're failed or in operational status. I can actually switch this into a light or dark mode, similar to the other interface items. I can also go to other systems. For example, this is the Spectrum Accelerate. I can bring up its disks, or its power supplies, etc. Anything that it's actually reporting on, I can actually bring up here in my GUI. For example, here's the XIV and its UPSs. I can see those IOPS, latency and bandwidth, as well as a trending forecast. Again, different ways of looking at the statistics by forecasting, current or historic. The chart itself is hot and live, so I can actually click and pin. And if I want to see the hosts, obviously I can bring up hardware, capacity, targets. I can actually bring up those reports. I can even shut down the system if I have enough writes. As before, I can actually change the view. If I just simply do a right click, I can then change the view and save it. Here's all the hosts on this particular system. Notice how my view has changed. 6 hosts on the right and on the left. And it shows me that I can do some savings if I was able to compress them, but right now I'm not. And as you can see, I've now focused just on the XIV and the system itself. If I want to update the name, I can do that very quickly and easily. Click Apply, I would simply change the name. You can see the gauges underneath in terms of the volumes and the physical usage. I can bring up other tabs. So for example, I can bring up many tabs and have different views from the button bar or from the search field, and then simply switch between them. So for example, I could actually have a remote view and a remote tab. I can actually bring up the connectivity or the quality of service and put those in those tabs, and notice the tab name changes based on what it's showing. And now back to the dashboard.